Why is it absolutely important as parents to take an intentional approach of asking questions of our kids about the leaders in their lives? Stay tuned. We're going to talk about that today.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you also learn how to raise empowered kids ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Hello, my friend. I'm delighted that you are with me today. On these episodes on Thursdays, where I really focus on trying to help parents and caregivers and mentors, those who are working with and impacting and raising the next generation, so that we together can have this mission to raise kids who are spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart. What a difference it would make for our kids to go into adulthood with this skill set and with this mindset and not have to figure all this stuff out as they go through adult life. Because you know probably what I know, which is everybody doesn't always end up figuring it out anyway. And that's my mission. And hey, if you haven't already, make sure to go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact. It's a weekly newsletter. It's got all kinds of great stuff in there. And you can also check out speaking engagements and other resources that I'll have on the website there. Basically, that's the best place to go. You can connect with me on social media there and just all that kind of information. Today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to follow up a little bit with what I started talking about in last week's episode. Oh, how I wish we could raise our kids for the world that we would like for them to inhabit and not the one that we have to actually prepare them for. But I know from history, from being a history teacher, that there was no grand, glorious time in the world. Okay, well, way back in the very beginning before sin. Yeah, okay, but foregoing that, where childhood and life was just all wonderful and awesome and thrilling and all of that. Nostalgia does not have 2020 eyesight. Nostalgia has very distorted eyesight. It has a filter on it. And sometimes it's easy to want to look back to other times, especially if they get portrayed in books or movies or television shows and think, oh, if only I was raising my kids for that time, that would be the time. But, then we're like, okay, yeah, maybe they didn't have this cultural issue or this one to deal with. But, people died when they were really young, and people got used to burying their kids when they were really young because so many of them got wiped out by diseases and things that now we just take for granted that we have treatments for. Well, one of the things that we do have to prepare our kids for now is for the reality that there can be people in leadership roles in their life who take advantage of them from one degree to another. And we have to prepare for them for that. We talked a little bit about that in last week's episode, but I want to talk about that a little bit more. It's such an important responsibility that we have for kids. And again, as I talked about last week, we walk this tension between having kids grow up with awareness so that they can be strong and safe in this world. And yet we don't want to freak them out and make them paranoid about ever stepping foot outside of their front door. I also want to say, as I'm talking about this a little bit more in today's episode, I understand that abuse happens in individual homes with moms and dads. And I am aware that at some point, somebody that's going to listen to this podcast episode, and that's going to be true for what's happening in your own home. And I'm specifically not addressing that reality in this podcast episode. And I may not address that at all. I don't know in future episodes. We'll just have to wait and see. Not because I live in la la land and don't know that that occurs. I know that that occurs, not just by understanding, what's out there, but even in my own life experience. But because that is something that needs to be dealt with great intentionality and with great wisdom, I don't want to just throw out some ideas that can take a difficult situation and make it even worse. So as I talk about this issue with adults in positions of authority who abuse and exploit and take advantage of children and of young people, don't mistake that my leaving out addressing that happening with parents is naivety, that it doesn't happen with parents. I know that it does. But I'm specifically going to be focusing on when it's happening with adults that are outside of the home. I also wish, of course, that we could talk about, well, I actually just wish we didn't have to talk about this at all. But the reality is that we do need to raise our kids to be mindful and aware that there are people who are in positions of leadership that they will encounter in their lives. It's not a matter of if, it's only going to be a matter of when, what age they are, and whether it's something that they experience directly themselves or it happens with a close friend or family member or in an institution that they're a part of, that they will encounter people in leadership who take advantage of others because of their leadership role. And that ranges on the spectrum of being annoying to being devastating. And that can be exploitation, that can be abuse, that can be manipulation. I mean, it follows the whole spectrum. What are some ways that you as a parent can help prepare your children to recognize that and to not fall victim to that, and then to help other people respond to that as they get older and go through life? Well, the first thing that you can do is you have to practice good leadership awareness yourself. How do you see leadership? What are you looking at in the leaders that you have in your life? And also, how are you talking about those leaders? There's an old expression that what forms our kids is more caught than taught. It's more about what they observe and hear than what we specifically set out to teach them. And there's some truth to that. That doesn't mean that we're not intentional about what we teach them. But it is true that what we say just kind of in an ordinary kind of way of living, that's going to have a huge impact on the viewpoint that our children develop, both of leadership and of leaders. If you're constantly, every time if you talk about somebody who's in a role of leadership, whether that is political at a national level, whether that is in your church, in your school, in your community, on a sports team, in whatever areas that your in family engages and that your children engage with other adult leaders, if most or all of your conversation is negative and it's bad mouthing, that's going to have an impact in a couple of different ways. One is it's shaping your children's view of leadership, not just those individual leaders, but leadership as a category in a negative way. And that might make your kids afraid to even aim to be leaders themselves. Because if everything that they've kind of heard about leadership is negative and it's about people that are dumb or they just make bad decisions or they're just in it for themselves. And over here, you're trying to raise a child without that kind of character. They can end up equating those two views as, oh, I guess that's just what happens when you step into leadership. Make certain that you are talking about and introducing and pointing out positive leaders and leadership in your children's lives. There's a statistic that gets thrown around a lot, and I don't think this is a hard and fast rule, but I do think it is a good principle, and that is the idea that it takes about 7 positive messages to counteract 1 negative one. I mean, because think about that. Somebody can say 7 positive things to you, and then one person says something negative, and what's the thing that's going to stick in your mind or going to tend to stick in your mind? It's going to be that negative thing, and it takes a lot more work to pull off that negative thing. It's like a leech, it's just kind of like sticks to you, and you've got to like pull it off and make sure all of it's gone. Whereas the positive things are just more like water that can just kind of flow over you, and then it's gone. So we want to be mindful about how we're talking about leadership and about leaders to our kids. The positive things that you say need to way outnumber the negative things you say, unless you are dealing with a leader who really is not qualified to be in the position that they're in. And then you need to address that in a way where you're teaching your child, well, why is that? Not just because you don't like their policy decisions or whatever, and not just because they're just this bad person, but why are they a bad leader? And that takes a lot of work, and it's easy. It's just so much easier, isn't it, to just fall into these categories where we just stick a label on somebody and we say, well, they're just this bad whatever, this bad president. They're a bad administrator. They're a bad pastor. I mean, it's just easier if we resort to childlike thinking and behaving where we categorize people as good or bad. But we are supposed to lay aside childish things and grow up, and that means we have to deal with nuance. We have to teach our kids to deal with nuance. But the first thing I would say is practice good leadership awareness and communication yourself about what you're teaching your kids about leadership just as a general category of life. You don't want them to be paranoid and afraid of being a leader. You also don't want to make them so afraid of leadership that they decide that they're going to be in charge and they're going to seek out to be a leader simply so they don't allow themselves to be in vulnerable positions with other people in life. Another practice is don't defend all adult leaders and assume that it's your responsibility to make them out to be a good person. If your 12-year-old is coming home and is telling you that their science teacher is a grumpy Gus day in and day out, don't try to talk your kid out of their perspective. You don't have to respond to that by saying, you shouldn't say that. No, I've met him. I think he's a really nice man. You shouldn't be talking about that, about your teacher. That's not a very nice thing to say. No. Instead, ask them, well, okay, so what do you mean by grumpy? Like give me an example of that. Not in a confrontational way, but in a curious way. Find out, why do they think that? Why don't they enjoy their teacher? I mean, let's just be honest, shall we? Just because somebody is in any job at all, just because they're a nurse, does not make them a caring, compassionate person. Trust me on this one. I have a daughter-in-law who is an amazing nurse. She's the nurse you would want to have no matter what you went into the hospital with. But she knows all nurses are not caring, compassionate people. There are people who are in that job that really shouldn't be in that job. All teachers are not selfless people who are fantastic teachers who want to engage with students. There are teachers who actually don't even like students. Okay? That's kind of a secret we don't want to talk about, but there's truth to that. We want to teach our children the difference between a position and an individual. So if your kid comes home and is talking about their Sunday school teacher, their coach, their teacher, anybody who's an adult in a position of leadership, don't feel like it's your job as an adult to stick up for all the other adults that are in their lives. Be curious about why they feel the way they do. Now, let's say, for example, that Mr. Grumpy Gus science teacher, and you happen to know that he's going through some really difficult things. Maybe it's a matter that he's had some family issues going on. There's some health issues and things that they're not going to be, it's not appropriate to make public, but it's having a profound impact on him. But those aren't things that you can share with your kid. Well, rather than trying to talk your kid out of their perspective, this is a great time to just come alongside and to just make suggestions to teach them how they might be able to have a different perspective. Again, you're not trying to talk them out of their perspective. You're presenting another one for their consideration. You may say something that, one time I had an experience with someone, and they were just they were grumpy, like it sounds like, Mr. Grumpy Gus science teacher is for you. And I know that's hard because I've been in that situation and I know that's not pleasant. But what I later found out was that person was dealing with the death of a parent, or that person, their child was going through a really bad spell, and they were just really so concerned about their kid. Or, that person's wife was dealing with cancer and didn't want to talk about it, didn't want people to know about it. They wanted to keep it very private and very personal. And later when I learned that, then I felt kind of bad because I didn't know that. But I realized that that really had more to do with why they were so grumpy and seemed like they, were so uncaring, more than because that's actually who they were. And you might say, so sometimes we don't always know what's going on in other people's lives, and this is an opportunity to perhaps have some grace. Again, it's not about talking your kids out of their perspective. You want to know their perspective. You want to be able to hear and see how they are engaging with the world. Another practice, which is incredibly important, is this: ask, don't assume. That's just a good principle for all of life. How much pain could be avoided if we ask questions instead of making assumptions? And the value of asking your kids, intentionally asking them. Again, this isn't like an interrogation, and it's not just when something has hit the fan and something bad has happened. It's just a matter of conversational life that goes on all the time. And when you develop this routine of asking about the authority that's in their life, asking them about what do they like about this person's style, what do they like about how they coach the team, what do they wish was different about how they ran their classroom, what do they like about the pastor there, what is there anything there that they would do differently that they think would help that person to be more effective. The value of those kinds of questions are threefold. First of all, you are learning your kids' answers will clue you in as to how they see and perceive the world and how they engage with that. That has a tremendous value. The other value to that is you gain information on other adults. Now, this isn't, because you're trying to be a spy and you're trying to get all this inside, information. But you do want to be able to know about the people who are having an impact and influence in your children's lives, especially if they are in any kind of position where they could ever be alone with your child, and or they could be forming a one-to-one relationship with your child, whether that is physical or whether that is virtual. You can't just focus on the physical one-to-one relationship anymore. You also have to factor in the virtual one-on-one relationship. So you do want to have information. And just talking to your kids about a lot of different things with that is a way to do that. The third value of being intentional to ask, not assume, is that it teaches your child to have a curious, questioning, intentional approach to life. There are some ideas and information that your child is never even going to think about unless you pose the question that gets their mind thinking about it. Maybe there's something that feels a little off, but they've learned, or their personality or whatever, but they're just kind of discounting it. It might be that you're asking them one question could be the trigger point that starts making them pay more attention to that part of them that feels like something here just doesn't quite feel right. Something seems a little off. But if you're not asking that question, there's not going to be any other external prompt that is going to cause them to ask that question and then to think, hey, maybe I need to start examining this, or maybe I need to bring this up and get some more insight or find out a little bit more about this. Another practice is to not make people out to be all bad or all good. And this is true both for people who are like out there as well as people who are within your own community and circle. One of the heartaches of growing up is realizing that people aren't all good or all bad. I mean, wouldn't it just be easier if that's the way that we could deal with life and people were all good or they were all bad? Oh yeah, I would like to live in that world, but that's not the one that we live in. It is hurtful and it is hard for our kids to learn good people can do bad things. Bad people can do good things. But our kids have to learn this. People who are evil, I mean, truly practicing evil, don't show up typically as evil people. Sometimes they do, but that's the exception, not the rule. They show up as good people. And if we don't engage with life and we don't talk about the fact that people aren't all good or bad, if we're not willing to engage with the nuances and the grayness of life, I'm not talking about moral codes that God has established, but I'm talking about the fact that we are all flawed individuals and we can be great in a lot of ways. And there can be some areas in our lives where we still have some tremendous maturing to do. There is a difference between people who are wise, between people who are foolish, and people who are evil. Most of the people that our kids will encounter in their life will fall into that middle category or that first category. They will hopefully be surrounded by a lot of wise people, and I would definitely pray for that for your kids, or they will deal with a lot of foolish people. But they may encounter an evil person, a person who truly wants to exploit and abuse and take advantage of them in some way or another, whether that's physically, financially, sexually, relationally, whatever it is. And this is where, if we haven't taught them through our example and through our language and by intentional conversation with them, that people are nuanced and that evil people typically show up as good people in the beginning, and how do we pay attention to, okay, is this just basically a good person who has some pockets of immaturity, or is this an evil person who is masquerading as a good person in order to be able to take advantage of me? We have to be able to and willing and to do the practice of not making people out to be all good or all bad. And that's just work. And that's something that happens over a period of time. This doesn't begin when your kids are 10 or 15. This begins when your kids are 2. And when your 2-year-old comes home from Sunday school and says, I don't like Sunday school because, Mrs. So-and-so, she's just not very nice. If your response to that is, oh, you shouldn't say that. I mean, of course she's nice and blah, blah, blah. Don't just assume that your job as a parent is to defend all other adult leaders. Of course, we also want to not go to the other extreme and to think that just because our 2-year-old said, that Mrs. Sunday school teacher was not very nice, that all of a sudden Mrs. Sunday school teacher, well, clearly she can't be very nice because, she hurt my kid's feelings. She made him pick up those toys, and she did that in a way that wasn't very nice. We want to avoid both of those extremes. We saw here in Nehemiah chapter 5 where the Jewish leaders, even though the whole nation there is under rule of this foreign government, they're all in this incredibly vulnerable positions, how they are still taking advantage of their own brothers and sisters, their own people here. And this still happens in our churches, in our schools, on our sports teams. Yes, even in our families, this can happen. But we do not have to just throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. There are practices that we can be intentional about so that our kids can be prepared to be leaders who won't be exploitive and take advantage of people and use their power to just enrich themselves. We can also help them to be people who will spot these kinds of individuals and to hold them accountable and to not end up being their victims. All right, my friend. Well, I've gone a little bit longer on today's episode than I normally do for the Thursday episodes, but I hope this has been helpful for you. I wish that we were raising kids in a very different world, but our responsibility is we've got to raise them for the world in which they live, not the one in which we wish they lived. Again, if you haven't already, make sure to hop over and to the website, stephaniepresents.com. Sign up for High Impact while you're there. If you are a subscriber, can I just say thank you? I value that. I appreciate the opportunity to show up in your inbox every week. And also, thank you for listening to this podcast. Share it with somebody else. And remember this, my friend, you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.